Good afternoon, dear viewer. Today we will talk about war and who needs it. Subscribe to our American YouTube channel. Like it, we will have many different and interesting topics and theories. Let's go. Throughout history, people fought any war. Destructively brings more destruction and suffering than more profitable, and nevertheless, people continued to wage wars and justify them about the need to fight. Spoke in ancient Greece and Rome, in China, India, and in Europe Middle Ages. What is a war and why do people fight? The war in the classical sense is the armed confrontation of two states. They may differ in the size of the territory or population, but must have an approximately equal political status. Most often, states were at war to capture someone else's territory or resources, but sometimes wars began for completely ridiculous reasons. For example, after one country lost another football, when a large state faced an external problem. It could achieve the desired with the help of weapons. Agreements with other countries were often violated, but in the 20th century the attitude to wiring has changed significantly thanks to the appearance of nuclear weapons, which turned out to be so destructive that any country that used it caused damage not only to the enemy, but also to itself. How has the attitude to wars in the 21st century changed? The global idea of wars has also been transformed over time. A modern state was transformed, and realized the level of economic and political losses related to the war. For example, it is difficult to explain to citizens why the taxes that they pay are going to finance hostilities. Another reason for changes in the spread of the media and their influence on political processes. Today, soldiers, taking advantage of modern technologies, can show what is actually happening in the zone of military conflict. Institutions of international law and state organizations, for example, the UN or the European Union, continue to develop. They help regulate the political situation in the world and war. If the war has yet begun, such an organization tend to prevent an increase in the level of violence and resolve the conflict as soon as possible. The number and scale of military conflicts is gradually decreasing. After the Second War, large states actually abandoned direct clashes among themselves and turned to political games. Non-state entities, rebel movements, revolutionary groups or terrorist organizations were an active initiator of modern wars. They are less burdened with some kind of political obligations. Agreements. As modern military conflicts proceed, most of the clashes in the 21st century occurs inside the states. For example, when government forces fight rebels or opposition. However, some conflicts grow so much that other states begin to get involved in them. In this case, all participants in the conflict often face negative consequences, say refugees or fluctuations in energy prices in the world. There are still separate regions where military conflicts arise more often than in other places. This is facilitated by three main factors. Firstly, high birth rate. Secondly, a low standard of living and three poorly developed system of institutions, without which it is impossible to maintain stable power in the country. Sometimes the rebels manage to establish a military dictatorship, which can persist for several years. But such cases are extremely rare. With the development of technology, another type of war has appeared, the information methods of which were the invasion of the election of cyber attacks of the spread of false news, a combination of elements of traditional military tactics. And modern approaches are often called hybrid wars. What changes will the military sector occur? Many technologies that we use in everyday life were originally military projects. In the future of the military sphere, the development of robots and drones will continue. Smart machines will be able to track down and accurately determine the goal on which you need to strike, analyze the consequences of a blow and give statistics. Such a technique will become less expensive in economic terms. For example, the production of drone today costs several tens of times cheaper than the production of fighters will change. Instead of people, the composition of the professional army will gradually occupy cheap and simple use of the machine for the full operation of drones. You will need a serious infrastructure, including satellites from countries that are technologically lagging behind. There will be no way to produce such devices. It turns out that the wars of the future will most likely become asymmetric. Developed countries will be able to lead with the help of cars, and these cars will fight against people. Some experts believe that clashes between countries will increasingly take the nature of trade wars. The main goal of the struggle of states is economic domination, as well as the possibility of dominating in the field of production and trade. Instruments of such wars will be sanctions, customs restrictions, and even trade blockade. All people want to live safely. Most of us have realized the convenience of a prosperous life. And they do not want to lose them. In the media in many countries for a long time propagate humanistic values and call for rejection of violence. And despite the fact that there are people who are looking for a chance to realize or get a special sensation in the war, they are becoming smaller. Although people manage to significantly reduce the number and scale of the wars, it will not be possible to completely avoid them in the near future. Most likely, they will develop into sluggish conflicts, which will last decades without direct military clashes, and peacekeeping organizations will play the main role in them. There is an assumption that people will abandon internecine wars if they face an extraterrestrial threat. In this case, all of humanity will have to unite for the sake of general salvation. However, such a situation is extremely difficult to predict. While people should think about minimizing the number of military clashes on Earth,